Mr. Shen married a young and beautiful wife. Everyone in the circle knows that the wife of Shen Yuyuan, the president of Shen Group, is fair-skinned, beautiful, and has long legs. She is the most beautiful woman in Tianjin, Song Jintang. In order to marry into the Shen family, Song Jintang did everything she could. It is said that Shen Yuyuan hated her to the core. Later, the two divorced, and others thought she would make a scene. Unexpectedly, she signed, left, and disappeared from Tianjin completely. It didn't seem like she was kicked out, but it seemed that she was tired of playing with him and didn't want him anymore. Chapter 001, Heart's Desire. Song Jintang lazily leaned in the driver's seat, watching through the car window as a black sedan came to a stop in the rain. A few bodyguards held umbrellas, and a tall man bent down to help a woman into the car. Their upper bodies were hidden from view, but the man's long legs, wrapped in black trousers, were perfectly proportioned. The black car in the misty rain drove off, but the woman sitting in the driver's seat didn't change her posture. Her delicate, white fingers drummed absently on the steering wheel, seeming utterly indifferent. Her calm expression made her friend worry. With your looks and figure, you're one in a million. How is it that you couldn't compete with that vixen? Song Jintang snapped out of it, correcting, it's Heart's Desire. Her friend choked, that vixen. Heart's Desire can be seen hanging out with several male escorts. You've got all the evidence, but you're protecting her, letting your husband pick her up. Watching them all cozy with each other, doesn't it upset you? Song Jintang gave a small laugh and didn't respond, starting the car to drop her friend off. By the time she arrived, it was almost 10 o'clock. The rain was still pouring, and Song Jintang, feeling a bit restless, laid out a yoga mat in the living room to meditate and calm her mind. The sound of a car engine came from the yard. Mid-pose, Song Jintang slowly opened her eyes. She saw a man holding an umbrella walking toward her through the floor-to-ceiling windows. She exhaled deeply, pretending she hadn't seen him. The black dog lying on the floor perked up excitedly and tried to rush toward the door. Song Jintang snapped at it, and the dog, with a pitiful look, laid back down, mimicking its owner by arching its back. When Shen Yuyuan entered, he saw Song Jintang, revealing a sliver of her slender waist and long legs. Her skin was as pale and smooth as snow, her legs slim and long with beautifully shaped contives, exuding an indescribable beauty. The sight was enchanting, even making the normally cold and indifferent Shen Yuyuan glance twice. However, when the black dog lay on its back with all four paws in the air, following its owner's yoga pose, he pursed his lips and said coldly, "Are you teaching it how to seduce men?" Did he just say that? Why didn't he just say she was trying to seduce him? Why bring the dog into it? Song Jintang wasn't someone with a good temper, and she certainly wouldn't take being insulted in front of Shen Yuyuan. She sat up, her gaze landing on him. Other than the slightly damp pants, he still looked exquisite and composed. With a smile, she said, "Don't go blaming me for your mistakes. Whatever grievances you've suffered elsewhere, don't take it out on me. I'm your wife, not your punching bag." Shen Yuyuan remained calm, his face emotionless as he watched her. He casually tugged off his tie and threw it on the sofa before sitting down. Song Jintang found his behavior boring. After all, when they had that passionate night together, reporters were waiting outside the room, yet Mr. Shen remained composed and unaffected. He was as steady as water, so calm and deliberate. Did he ever feel flustered in front of her, his heart's desire? Her lack of interest made it hard to argue with him. She got up and was about to head upstairs. "It's Wednesday." His cold voice echoed behind her, and Song Jintang snapped back to reality. Right. How could Mr. Shen lower himself to enter her territory except on Wednesday? Wednesday, the day she looked forward to. Her mood lifted instantly. She ran barefoot, happily jumping into his lap. "I'll give you some credit you haven't forgotten such an important day." With that, she wrapped her arms around his neck, her tongue dancing on his lips. Chapter 002, The Sand You Cannot Hold. Song Jintang didn't know how they ended up on the yoga mat. It was just a thin mat, very uncomfortable, making her feel restless. She pushed Shen Yuyuan's shoulder, and he glanced at her with eyes tinged red, tightening his grip, as though venting his frustration. Song Jintang knew he was doing it on purpose. Besides the discomfort on her back, everything else seemed fine, so she closed her eyes and tried to endure. By the time they made their way upstairs and finished, it was already past 1 in the morning. Song Jintang was completely drained of energy. Shen Yuyuan put on a bathrobe and headed for the bathroom. When she finally spoke, I need a shower too. She felt sticky with sweat, not comfortable at all. Shen Yuyuan stood by the bed, looking at her coldly. Aside from the redness at the corners of his eyes from passion, he had returned to his usual detached demeanor. Song Jintang ignored his indifference, stretching her arms toward him and asking to be held. I'm really out of energy. Didn't he hear how hoarse her voice was? Shen Yuyuan stared at her for a long moment before finally lifting her up. Song Jintang appreciated his embrace, wrapping herself around him and teasing his ear playfully. He ran the bathwater and carried her into the tub while he went into the shower to rinse off. Song Jintang watched his figure behind the frosted glass, thinking about his good physique and handsome face. She was satisfied with how he'd taken care of her tonight, and her mood lifted. Shen Yuyuan washed quickly, wrapped a towel around his waist, glanced at her, and left the bathroom. Song Jintang's eyes followed his well-defined back until he was out of sight, sighing, such a good body. Looking down at her own body, she muttered, I've got a good body too. No need to envy him. Then she hummed softly while enjoying her bath. She paused when she heard a phone call from outside, listening intently. Stop crying, I'm coming over now. His voice was soft and gentle, and the fact that he was going over anyone could guess who was on the other end of the line. Song Jintang grew angry. She deliberately raised her voice, shouting, Hubby, I'm done with my bath, carry me out. There was silence outside. Soon, Shen Yuyuan appeared at the bathroom door with an unhappy expression. His menacing look made her not dare let him carry her. She quickly wrapped herself in the bathrobe and approached him, playfully running her finger along his palm and whispering, But it's Wednesday. 1:20 a.m., Thursday. He coldly yanked his hand away and turned toward the dressing room. Song Jintang wanted to get angry but restrained herself. In a pitiful tone, she said, But you came late. I wanted you to stay and accompany me. As she reached to jump on him, Shen Yuyuan shoved her against the wardrobe, his voice cold, Stop pretending. Save some face for yourself. Even though she was used to his indifference, his words still pierced her heart. In his eyes, she wasn't truly Mrs. Shen. She needed to understand how their marriage came about. Having heard this, if she kept trying to get closer, it would be shameless and pathetic. She crawled back into bed and wrapped herself in the blanket. Shen Yuyuan dressed without sparing her a glance and left without saying another word. When the sound of the car engine faded, the entire villa fell into an eerie silence. This silence made Song Jintang uneasy, and it erased any lingering sleepiness. She grabbed her phone, typed "Yes gone," and headed to the study. She opened the bottom drawer of the desk, where a pile of contracts lay with a bright red book on top. Song Jintang flipped it open. The background of the book was red, with a young couple dressed in white shirts, close to each other. The man had a smile playing on his lips, his eyes full of joy. He looked truly happy. The girl was also radiant, her eyes full of happiness. Seeing their smiling faces made Song Jintang's eyes sting with tears. She immediately threw the book into the trash. Since he was like sand that couldn't be held, she might as well let him go. Chapter 003, That Woman is Dirty. Shen Yuyuan got into the car and started checking his phone. The light and shadows outside the car window flickered across his face, making his features seem even more harsh and cold. He had married a woman he didn't love, and yet every Wednesday, he had to come back for bed service. Even when he was on a business trip, he couldn't escape it, it just got postponed. As his assistant, Xu Zong sympathized with him. In the past, after finishing with that woman, his boss would go to the club and drink until dawn. He felt disgusted by her, thinking she was dirty, and that she had made him feel dirty too. But today, despite the time, Shen Yuyuan still wanted to go to Miss Lu's place. Xu Zong thought about it for a moment and then spoke up to remind him, although we didn't get any photos of you and Miss Lu, and it hasn't hit the internet yet, it's still Wednesday. The old man is watching closely, and he'll definitely know that you went to pick her up. If you go now, it might. Shen Yuyuan lifted his gaze, and a sharp glint flashed in his cold eyes, making his handsome face look even more intimidating. Xu Zong swallowed the words, nobody's going to have it easy, that were on the tip of his tongue. After a long silence, the man in the backseat finally spoke, go back. Shen Yuyuan had come back, and Song Jintang was surprised for a moment before realizing why he had returned. For that woman with the surname Lu, Shen Yuyuan was willing to give up the inheritance of the Shen family. If it hadn't been for Shen Grandpa bringing up his deceased mother, she and Shen Yuyuan's marriage would never have happened. The more Shen Yuyuan liked Miss Lu, the more Shen Grandpa hated her. He was just waiting for a mistake to send her away. Now, coming back to coax her into going to the old mansion to plead on his behalf, Shen Yuyuan was willing to endure this little grievance. Song Jintang was tired, and perhaps it was the effect of the medication she had just taken, which made her feel drowsy and impatient. Without waiting for him to speak, she said, "I'll go to the old mansion tomorrow. I won't let Grandpa cause you trouble." Shen Yuyuan raised an eyebrow in surprise, not expecting her to be so easy to deal with. After a moment, he asked, "What are you playing at?" Song Jintang didn't explain much. She curled up under the blanket and went to sleep. Shen Yuyuan stood by the edge of the bed, waiting for her to speak. When she didn't, he became annoyed, his cold gaze turning toward the guest room. The next morning, when Song Jintang woke up, Shen Yuyuan was already gone. After having breakfast, she went to the Shen family's old mansion. The Shen family's old mansion was a 2-story courtyard, not very large, and only Shen Grandpa and Grandma lived there. An elderly couple who were kind and sensible. Grandpa loved playing chess, while Grandma loved cooking. Song Jintang spent a few rounds of chess with Grandpa before heading to the kitchen to help Grandma with the cooking. After taking the crispy pork out of the oil to drain, Song Jintang leaned in and whispered into Grandma's ear. Listening to her words, Grandma furrowed her brow. "You're just letting it go like this. He once wanted to marry Miss Lu. If I hadn't interfered, things wouldn't have turned out like this. I also owe Miss Lu an apology. You and Grandpa have always been kind to me, so I want to help me get justice. But scolding him, reprimanding him, or sending her away will only make him grow distant from you. It'll only push him further away." Grandma thought this made sense. "So, should I tell Grandpa exactly what you said?" "Yes, thank you, Grandma." Song Jintang pouted, happily plating the crispy pork. Looking at the ketchup drizzled onto the plate, the bright red color was very tempting. Unable to resist, Song Jintang scooped a bit with her finger and popped it into her mouth. Grandma took a clay pot and saw her stealing a taste. She froze for a moment. "Sweet things, you should eat less of them. You have a weak spleen and can't digest them well." Song Jintang smiled and nodded before secretly scooping another bit to continue. Not listening, Grandma said, snatching the ketchup away. Song Jintang pouted, still licking her finger like a little cat. It was the first time Shen Yuyuan saw this side of Song Jintang, soft and adorable, like a greedy little kitten, more endearing than ever before. "Grandma," he said. Caught licking her finger, Song Jintang froze, hiding her hand behind her back. "How did he get here?" Shen Yuyuan stared at her and walked directly toward her. Song Jintang didn't know what he was going to do and instinctively took a step back. He placed a hand on her waist, and his thumb brushed past her lips. A tingling sensation spread from the corner of her mouth. Was Shen Yuyuan out of his mind? Chapter 004, Playing Hard to Get. However, Song Jintang soon realized that such intimacy was done for the grandparents to see. Maybe there was ketchup on the corner of her mouth. He would openly wipe her mouth, and she would cooperate obediently, holding his arm affectionately, pretending to be happy and asking, "Why are you here?" Although this is his grandparents' house, apart from the routine show of affection, the two of them try not to appear in the same occasion. He was really weird today. "I know you're coming today, and I want to accompany you." These words sound loving. But the truth was definitely not like that. Shen Yuyuan didn't believe that she would really come to clean up the mess. He thought she was playing tricks, so he just came to keep an eye on him. After the two of them accidentally went to bed, he thought it was her plan and would not allow uncontrollable things to happen again. But she no longer had the beautiful vision she had at the beginning for Shen Yuyuan, so it didn't matter what he thought. Grandma Shen went to call Grandpa to eat, and she and he held hands and went to the restaurant in a loving manner. There was a joyful atmosphere at the dinner table, and Song Jintang considerately picked up dishes and served soup to Shen Yuyuan. Grandpa Shen talked to him about some company matters at the dinner table, and then changed the subject. Tang said that you have a good relationship. We hope that our great-grandson will respect the pace of you two young couples. The implication was that he didn't have to go to the Song family every Wednesday. Shen Yuyuan's calm black eyes looked over. Song Jintang smiled and looked back at him, his eyes saying, "Are you surprised? Are you surprised?" He picked up some food for her, then continued calmly, "The doctor also said that if you want to get pregnant, it will be easier if you relax." Song Jintang immediately nodded in agreement, but he felt disdainful in his heart. This guy just spoke nonsense out of his mouth. In Grandma Shen's eyes, the two people's gazes and interactions were full of love, and she was very pleased. The lunch ended happily. Shen Yuyuan had work to do in the afternoon, so Song Jintang did not stay in the old house for long and said goodbye to the old people. She didn't drive when she came, but took his arm and asked for a ride. When opening the passenger door, Song Jintang immediately saw a sticker on the car that read, "My exclusive little stool, other girls please sit in the back seat," with a photo of that person next to it. She was embarrassed for a moment, but thinking that her grandparents were still watching her, she gritted her teeth and sat in. The moment the car door closed, perhaps because Shen Yuyuan also saw that she was sitting in a seat that did not belong to her, the feeling of loving happiness that had not yet been played out was suddenly replaced by suffocating coldness. Song Jintang felt suffocated, so he took out his mobile phone from his bag and opened the taxi-hailing app. The car drove out of the villa area and stopped. Song Jintang pushed the door and was about to get out, but his wrist was grabbed. She turned around and looked at his eyes, which were as dark as the abyss, without any temperature. She took a breath and explained, "Grandpa and Grandma are watching, I have to sit down and let go." "Just tell me what you want, don't play tricks," he asked, his voice dangerous. Song Jintang understood, but still didn't believe that she had let him go free. He pulled his wrist back with force. It turned red and a little painful. She couldn't stay here for even a second. She thought for a moment and smiled, "Well, I'm playing hard to get. After all, I failed to win your love, so I gave you something and that's how we got married. If forcing you doesn't work, I'll try another method." Shen Yuyuan recalled her crazy look when she chased the car in the rain and her feet were rubbed to the point of bleeding. His face turned cold and he said in a deep voice, "Get lost." Song Jintang said, "Oh," and got out of the car happily. Shen Yuyuan. Did she do that on purpose just now? When he wanted to question her, he saw the woman standing on the side of the road, taking out lipstick from her bag and applying it. In order to meet the old man, she wore a floral dress with a brown sweater on the outside, and tied her long hair into a ponytail, looking gentle and simple. With the change of lipstick and the looseness of long hair, she becomes charming and seductive again. He just felt an inexplicable irritation in his heart again, so he withdrew his gaze and drove away. Chapter 005, Call Some Little Puppies. Since they parted on bad terms that day, the two didn't see each other again for a month. Shuzong, who was sitting in the passenger seat, felt that his boss had been acting really strangely lately. In the past, when he went to the Song family on Wednesdays, his boss's face was always cold and ugly. But now that he didn't have to go through the routine, his face became colder and uglier than before. Song Jintang was also a capable person. When he first fell in love with his boss, his love for him was earth-shattering. How come he suddenly changed his personality? It's been a month, and he just disappeared from the face of the earth. Not to mention the boss, he himself is a little uncomfortable with it. Today is Wednesday again. The boss doesn't go there anymore, and he hasn't kept up with the social engagements and arrangements. Shuzong is very worried and hopes that the boss will go out and have some fun soon and stop forcing him to work overtime. The boss in the back seat suddenly said, "Go to Li Guang." As soon as we arrived at the club, Feng Lang rushed over and said, "Brother, come and have a look, my sister-in-law is having a blast." Shen Yuyuan's face changed slightly, and his tone was very cold. "Isn't she filming? Why is she back?" Feng Lang stopped. Shen Yuyuan frowned. "Why are you standing there? Lead the way." Feng Lang felt a chill on his back, and tremblingly said, "It's not Sister Shi, it's Song Jintang." Shen Yuyuan raised the corners of his lips and looked at him sinisterly, as if to say, "Is Song Jintang worthy of being your sister-in-law?" Feng Lang is really innocent. If he didn't call Song Jintang's sister-in-law, he would be beaten by the two elders of the Shen family. He didn't come to his senses in an instant. Shen Yuyuan turned around and was about to leave. Feng Lang pursed his lips and said with a stiff face, "I suggest you go and take a look. If this person makes a scene, the consequences will be no different from that person's." Shen Yuyuan knew that Song Jintang was not an easy person to deal with, so he followed him to the box with a cold face. When I pushed open the door, the music seemed to burst my eardrums. 7 or 8 men without shirts were dancing around Song Jintang, and the lights intertwined their figures. Shen Yuyuan noticed at a glance that as she moved, a section of her snow-white waist was exposed under her loose shirt, which was more dazzling than the light. His eyes suddenly became cold and sharp. The music suddenly stopped. Song Jintang was unhappy. He turned around and was stunned for a moment when he met a pair of cold eyes. He couldn't stop his feet and fell directly into a man's arms. The fun was disturbed, and someone shouted unhappily, "What's going on? Who is this person?" Song Jintang immediately comforted him, "Boss Chu, it's okay, it's just my husband, let's continue." When she closed the door, she stole a glance at Shen Yuyuan with a dull expression. Well, she is not an important person, so naturally she would not stir up any emotions in him. She is obviously used to it, so was she just feeling expectant? She quickly shook her head and went to get busy. As soon as the door of the box was closed, Shen Yuyuan, who was isolated outside the door, had a cold expression on his face, which made the two people around him gasp. Shuzong was so frightened that he dared not speak, so Phone Lang had no choice but to bite the bullet and volunteer, "I'll go get my sister-in-law, Miss Song. She has fallen into depravity, why do you care about her?" Shen Yuyuan said, turned around and left. No one noticed that the door of the box, which had been cracked, closed quietly again. Song Jintang leaned against the wall, and somehow she remembered a month ago when Shen Yuyuan appeared in the box, pushed her aside, hugged the woman surnamed Lu, and said to her, "Stay away from her." That cold and disdainful tone was exactly the same as today. Mr. Chu put on his shirt and came over. "Girl, I'll sign the contract with you today. You may not be successful in love, but you are successful in business. You are so beautiful, you don't have to hang yourself on a crooked tree. If I like women, I will definitely chase you. Does Shen Yuyuan like men too? Otherwise, how could he ignore you with your looks and figure?" After being teased by Mr. Chu, Song Jintang felt much better. "Brother, are you interested in him?" Mr. Chu shook his head quickly, "That kind of man is cold and uninteresting. I'll call a few little puppies to serve you, as a courtesy." "Okay." The manager came to report that Miss Song had ordered 8 more men, all of them fresh hunks. The wine in Phone Lang's mouth spurted out, and before he could wipe it off, his brother went out with murderous intent. Chapter 006, both in office and in office. After signing the contract, Song Jintang half lay on the sofa. She had been busy with social engagements and drinking recently, and she was tired and a little sleepy. A young man took off her shoes and socks, but she didn't move. Her mind began to get confused, but Mr. District was still asking her if she wanted to make a bet. Mr. District deliberately named another person in her name, just to see Shen Yuyuan's reaction. "Whether he comes or not, I have no chance of winning. I'm betting with you just to make things difficult for myself. How can there be no chance of winning? If he comes, it means he cares about you. Sister, I am helping you. I bet he will come 100%. The rock and roll dance music in the box has been switched to soft and soothing piano music. The young man's technique is quite good." Song Jintang buried half of his face in the pillow and closed his eyes and said, "I bet he will come, too." After all, the price Shen Yuyuan paid to marry her was too high, and now is a critical moment in his work. If something unexpected happens to her, someone will definitely be furious. This was also the important reason why Phone Lang saw her and called someone over in a hurry. Song Jintang vaguely heard what Mr. Chu was saying again. Her eyelids were too heavy to open. The young man's technique and strength were quite good, so she completely relaxed and wanted to be dazed for 5 minutes. The door of the box was kicked open, and Song Jintang suddenly woke up with a fright. Before she could react, Mr. Ou leaned on her shoulder with a smile and whispered, "I've never seen such a thing in my life." He got angry like this. Is he still the most educated and elegant gentleman in the upper class, Shen Yuyuan? Angry? Song Jintang was a little confused and looked towards the door slowly. His brows were cold and he didn't seem to be moved or angry. As for the evil fire in Shen Yuyuan's heart, he didn't know whether it was because he saw Song Jintang's eyes were wet like a lost deer, or because the two of them were just massaging his feet, but in any case, he suppressed it without releasing it. Shuzong looked at the foot bath tub and medicinal oil inside. His mouth twitched, and he said, "Mr. Feng, Li Guang's business is so down to earth. This is Li Guanghui, the most expensive place in Tianjin. Is this it?" Phone Lang touched his nose. "Money makes the world go round. Business is difficult nowadays and the customers are all weird. In this situation, the foot massage naturally couldn't go on. The young men packed up their things and left. Mr. Chu was not afraid. He continued to whisper in her ear before getting up and saying, "Tomorrow evening at 5 o'clock, don't forget." Song Jintang said, "Oh," and the box fell completely quiet. Shen Yuyuan lit a cigarette on the sofa diagonally opposite her. He raised his eyes slightly, his pupils were as dark as the abyss, and the cigarette in his hand was glowing, but it could not block the hostility and coldness around him. Looking a little unhappy, Song Jintang buried her face in the pillow again, thinking about what Mr. Chu said. Why not give it a try? Maybe he really cares about her? She raised her head. Do you think that I will pay more attention to you if you find someone to have a casual flirtation with? When I agreed to marry you, I told you to be obedient. We in the Shen family have to maintain our reputation. He spoke first, his face in the green smoke was stern and cold, and there was deep disdain in his eyes. Mr. Chu said that Shen Yuyuan had been engaged to that girl for 4 years and were deeply in love with her, but they didn't get married. But he suddenly married you, which means there are serious problems between the two of them. She should not give up easily and try again. How ironic that she actually believed it just now. Song Jintang took a breath and responded coldly, "My reputation and face have fallen to the ground, and the first to suffer is the Song family. You don't have to use the marriage incident to point at me. Everyone in Jintang knows about Mr. Chu's hobbies. Do you think everyone is the same as you? You have an affair and you still need your wife to clean up your ass." Shen Yuyuan glanced at her and said with a smile, "Song Jintang, you climbed into bed and schemed against me. You look so innocent and self-righteous, it's really being in office and standing at the same time." Song Jintang sneered. Chapter 007, A Secret. Shen Yuyuan's good upbringing can serve as a model in the circle. Born into a wealthy family, he has been strict with himself since childhood. Not to mention causing trouble, picking up girls and going to nightclubs like other young masters have nothing to do with him. He is self-disciplined and motivated, and his girlfriend is the one who stays with him from beginning to end. She was neither hurried nor slow, and she was graceful and elegant. Apart from her somewhat cold temperament, she was simply perfect. You see, when you are angry, you can just be nice to others, not swear. In fact, such coldness and ruthlessness are often the most hurtful. Her eyes were sore, but she still patiently explained, "I told you about that thing, it was an accident, No." She pursed her lips and didn't continue. She had already explained it, but he didn't believe it, so why waste more time on it? She is a girl from a good family. Her parents have carefully nurtured and educated her. Naturally, she knows the importance of reputation and will not belittle herself. Putting something on her head is an insult. After being married for more than half a year, she knew clearly how he viewed her and no longer cared. But today, for some reason, this emotion came up and I couldn't suppress it. She felt that if she stayed any longer, she would go up and scratch his face, so she glossed her eyes, picked up her coat and shoes and left. After opening the door, Feng Lang and Xu Zong saw her coming out barefoot and knew that they had not reached an agreement. "Sister-in-law, let me take you home," Feng Lang said, feeling that she was quite pitiful. She said coldly that it was not necessary and called the driver. She pushed open the door of the club and a cold wind blew in. She had been sweating from soaking her feet inside, and now she suddenly felt a chill all over her body and couldn't help shivering. Looking at her bare feet, Song Jintang remembered meeting Shen Yuyuan at a banquet. She was so happy that she couldn't control herself. She chased after his car, hoping that he could understand her. Maybe he would like her? Her high heels were uncomfortable, so she ran barefoot in the rain, following his car like crazy. Now thinking about it, it was really stupid. Song Jintang looked down at her feet. They were very white and beautiful. She had even carefully painted her toenails with nail polish. In fact, once was enough. She shouldn't continue to ruin it for the same thing or by the same person. She put on her shoes, wrapped her coat tightly around herself, and waited for the car to arrive. Even though she tried to protect herself, she still had a headache after returning home. The headache made her want to vomit. After vomiting, she felt like fainting, feeling uncomfortable all over, and couldn't stand up. Song Jintang woke up the next day in the hospital with a sore throat and difficulty breathing. There was a woman sitting on the sofa, wearing jeans, a sweater, and a baseball cap. But she was so good-looking that even such a simple and ordinary outfit couldn't suppress her beauty. She was worthy of being the national goddess and double award-winning actress Lu Yingxi. Noticing that she was awake, Miss Lu came over considerately and said, "Have a drink of water first." Song Jintang glanced at her, took the cup of water, and said in a light tone, "Why are you here?" "Your brother called Yuyuan and told him that you fainted, and I answered the phone." "Oh, I didn't tell him that you were sick, and he didn't know I was here." "We are love rivals, you won't be angry if I do this, right?" "You are right to do this." Song Jintang said, finishing the water and still a little thirsty, "Pour me another glass." Lu Yingxi responded sweetly, "Okay." After pouring her some water, she sat next to her affectionately. "The main reason I came here today is to thank you for helping me at the club last time." Song Jintang raised his eyes, "You thank me? Are you here to thank your wife with all your heart? How can this be so funny?" Miss Lu is quite confident, but now that someone has come to her, if she doesn't show some attitude, she will be too disrespectful to her love rival. "How are you going to thank me? Can I tell you a secret between Shen Yuyuan and me?" Song Jintang looked at her delicate and flawless face and asked faintly, "On the bed?" Chapter 008, Tea with Tea. Lu Yingxi narrowed her eyes slightly and smiled, "You really do know. If you didn't know, there wouldn't have been an incident like Wednesday." Song Jintang's throat was burning and she didn't respond. Besides, she couldn't respond. Was she going to ask, "What positions does my husband like to use when he is in bed with you, and whether he can last long?" She leaned lazily, with her eyelashes drooping, and drank the water slowly. Lu Yingxi was very close to her, staring at her, but no one knew what she was looking at. Song Jintang didn't feel uncomfortable either. She was confident in her appearance. Even though she was lying on the hospital bed with a pale face, she didn't feel that she was worse than the other person. "I originally wanted to tell you to make you happy, but now that you know, I will thank you in another way," Lu Yingxi said again. Song Jintang looked up at her, with a sincere expression on his bright face. He sighed and said, "Don't tell me you're going to take care of me here." Lu Yingxi was unhappy now. "How do you know everything?" Song Jintang put down the water cup. "Ms. Lu, I know a lot more than you think. For example, when Shen Yuyuan was in my bed on Wednesday night, what were you busy with?" Lu Yingxi's face changed, the smile disappeared from her lips, and her eyes turned cold, but it only took a moment for her to return to normal. "It is indeed inconsiderate of me to take care of you here, because I am his dearest, and you are annoyed just by looking at me, but gratitude is a must." Song Jintang made a tsk sound. Who cared about her thanks? Ignoring her, Song Jintang got out of bed and went to the bathroom. When she came out, she saw Lu Yingxi playing with her phone on the sofa. "Are you not planning on leaving? My good friend Shu Suihuan came over with breakfast." When he saw the person on the sofa, he immediately came over and asked in a low voice, "What's going on? Why is she here? What is she doing?" Song Jintang shook his head. "Who knows what she wants to do? Let her do whatever she wants." She was hungry, so she went to eat at the small coffee table. Her throat was so sore that she had difficulty swallowing even the porridge. Before breakfast was finished, the door was pushed open again. Song Jintang looked over and saw Shen Yuyuan in a suit and tie. Perhaps because he saw that it was her wearing the hospital gown, the panic in his eyes sank. "Brother Shen, you are finally here." Song Jintang had a mouthful of porridge in his mouth, and he coughed because he choked on the smell of Lu Yingxi's tea. "Sister Song, are you okay? Be careful." Lu Yingxi kindly handed her a tissue and walked to Shen Yuyuan. "Sister Song is so pitiful. Can you take care of her for me? It's like helping me repay her for helping me in the club." Shu Suihuan stood up unable to bear it any longer, and Song Jintang held her back, signaling her not to be impulsive. "I'll take you back first," Shen Yuyuan said. Lu Yingxi nodded, then turned back to Song Jintang and said, "Sister, I'll leave first." She didn't forget to wink at her, as if to say, "I asked him to take care of you, are you happy?" As soon as the door was closed, Shu Suihuan started to curse. "I never knew this woman was so vicious." "What do you mean, sisters? Are they divided by age? Letting Shen Yuyuan come and go like this is like stabbing Song Jintang in the heart." "Okay, he has no interest in me." "You knew this for a long time," Song Jintang said, lowering his head and continuing to drink porridge. "But he. Shu Suihuan felt really sad for her. "I really didn't expect that woman to be so high level. It's true that Shen Yuyuan gave her a lot of resources. She can win 2 Best Actress awards at the age of 28. She can't do it without hard work and determination. For an adopted daughter of the Liu family to reach her current position, she must have seized every opportunity and never let go. And that cannibalistic world can't produce naive people. So you're just going to let her bully you like this? Xu Sui was so angry that he died. Song Jintang laughed, am I that easy to bully? Chapter 009, Chu Chu makes people feel pity. Xu Yuyuan was amused by her. Yes, you can still grow wildly even if the sky falls, and you are not afraid. You have a really good personality. Then I don't understand, why did you fall on Shen Yuyuan and can't get up? Song Jintang sighed, maybe I owe him. Xu Yuyuan was still angry, if he misses you, I guarantee he will regret it. Song Jintang didn't answer. What does it matter whether he regrets it or not? He missed it after all. When Shen Yuyuan came back, Song Jintang had already started receiving intravenous drip. The ward was a little hot. She didn't cover herself with a blanket. She lay on the bed with her legs crossed, reading a book. She looked completely different from her usual image as a young lady. Apart from the necessary showmanship and a fixed meeting time on Wednesdays, he had no idea what Song Jintang was like in private. He really didn't expect that she would relax and not care about her image at all. Shen Yuyuan just looked at her tender white feet, swaying back and forth, feeling very happy. Their pear must be peeled into the shape of a rabbit, otherwise I won't eat it. She made the request, thinking it was Xu Yuyuan. Why ignore her? When he looked away from the book and saw the person, Song Jintang stopped shaking his feet and hid under the quilt obediently. He really didn't expect that he would come back. He really listened to Lu Yingxi. The two of them parted on bad terms yesterday, and today he was showing off his affection with Shen Jianjian, not paying any attention to her at all. Naturally, she treated him as if he didn't exist, so she turned aside and continued reading. Shen Yuyuan sat down on the sofa, and soon Xu Zong came in with documents and a fruit basket. Xu Zong was very tactful. He put down his things, said a few polite words to Song Jintang and left. In the corridor, he met Xu Yuyuan who was coming back from shopping and took him away, leaving the couple some space to be alone. Song Jintang couldn't wait for Xu Yuyuan to show up. Not to mention eating the pear, he even finished all the water in the cup. His throat was dry and itchy. He sat up and saw Shen Yuyuan working in the office. I want some water, she said. Shen Yuyuan didn't even raise his head, as if he didn't hear it. Song Jintang rolled his eyes. If he wanted to work, he would go to the company. Being here was an eyesore and made him feel bad. She wanted to press the bell to call the nurse, just to add to other people's workload by pouring a glass of water, but after thinking it over, she gave up, turned her back and continued reading. After reading a few pages, she couldn't help coughing. Her throat hurt so much that her ears were buzzing. Shen Yuyuan's dark eyes darkened. He stood up to pour her some water, helped her up, and patted her back. She turned around to look at him. Perhaps because of the severe coughing, the corners of her eyes were red and watery, looking particularly pitiful. His heart was choked, and he said in a bad tone, "What are you looking at? Drink." Song Jintang, what the hell is this? Why don't you just leave if you find it troublesome? She didn't make things difficult for herself. She drank some water to moisten her throat. She continued to turn her back to him, and Shen Yuyuan turned and left. Song Jintang didn't care about him. She thought that after the infusion, she could do whatever she wanted by herself without asking anyone for help. After a while, Shen Yuyuan came over again and said, "Eat, don't act like I'm torturing you." She turned around and saw a pear cut into the shape of a rabbit on a small plate. She didn't act pretentiously and wanted to reach out to take it. She looked at him and said, "I didn't wash my hands." Shen Yuyuan said, "It's a pity," but still took a wet towel to wipe her hands. She leaned against the pillow, lowered her head and ate in small bites, looking like a little squirrel. Shen Yuyuan found her much more pleasing to the eye, so he asked in a good-tempered manner, "Is that enough?" "It's not enough. Eat another one. This pear is juicy, cool and sweet, and feels very comfortable in the throat." Shen Yuyuan glanced at her. Due to her illness, her face was pale and bloodless, her flamboyant beauty was gone, and she looked pitiful and delicate. He held the pear and sat on a chair beside the bed. Song Jintang watched Shen Yuyuan peeling a pear with his head down. His profile was cold but handsome, and even his jawline seemed to be a perfect arc carefully carved by a god. This man is very attractive to women just by his looks. She thought of herself. She just wanted his face, but after being married for such a long time, this was the first time they got along so harmoniously. And this was all thanks to Lu Yingxi. It made her sad just thinking about it. Chapter 010, Restless. However, after Song Jintang decided to get rid of Shen Yuyuan, he decided not to be sad. Besides, she got married out of sheer madness, and it was all her own fault that she suffered the consequences today, so she can't blame others. But since she was married into the Shen family, getting a divorce would be a bit troublesome and would require a lot of planning, which made her a little annoyed. Shen Yuyuan noticed her gaze, and when he looked up, he saw her extremely long eyelashes and peach blossom eyes that were naturally misty and watery, seeming to be alluring. She just stared at him in a daze, which made the whole look a little more ugly. He pursed his lips and asked coldly, "What are you looking at?" Song Jintang came back to his senses, his clean and clear eyes were stained with a smile, and he opened his mouth to flirt, "Look at you, very handsome." Shen Yuyuan glanced at her. He had never seen anyone like Song Jintang. In Feng Lang's words, she was so beautiful, like a demon and a fairy. Of course, her hair is in sexy and charming big curls, but her face is very pure. There is no contradiction between the two, but rather a kind of contrasting beauty. Now her eyes are watery and innocent like a rabbit, but she is seductive like a fox. A woman who is restless even when she is sick. Shen Yuyuan looked at her coldly and handed the half-peeled pear directly to her. Song Jintang was speechless, looking at the big pear in front of him. What the hell is wrong with him? What a shame, these two guys, they come one after another to disgust her, she endures the disgust, but he just gives up and stops taking care of her. No way. I want the rabbit-shaped pear, she said, pushing the pear on the plate to him. Shen Yuyuan didn't answer and looked at her coldly. You are repaying a favor for someone else, but you are so perfunctory. You don't want her to come, but she agreed to it herself. Don't feel bad if I speak to her in a bad tone. Song Jintang said, leaning lazily against the head of the bed, waiting for his action. Perhaps it was because he mentioned his beloved, or perhaps it was because of the threat. His black eyes were as sharp as a knife. Song Jintang curled her lips. Harmony only lasted for a few seconds. This was the mode of getting along that she was familiar with. Okay, you don't have to take care of her here, and she doesn't have to thank me specially. This matter is over. She was sick and didn't want to make herself feel bad because of such a trivial matter. Don't do that. It won't be worth it if you do something weird later. Shen Yuyuan mocked her and continued to peel the pear. Song Jintang's eyes swelled up, he looked away and didn't say anything else. After all, if he continued to talk, it would be just a refutation and they wouldn't be on the same page. After a while, the dinner plate was placed on the bedside cabinet, and Shen Yuyuan returned to the sofa to continue his work. Song Jintang looked at the neatly arranged pear pieces and did not eat any more. The ward fell completely quiet, and the harmonious scene just now seemed like just an illusion. He was busy with work and she continued reading. When she felt pain on the back of her hand, she realized that the medicine had been completely infused at some point and her blood had returned, so she pressed the nurse's bell. Grandma Shen also came in with the nurse. It took a long time for the blood to return, and the blood had coagulated and blocked the syringe, so the nurse had to change the syringe. Grandma Shen glared at her grandson and asked, "Is this how you take care of people?" Shen Yuyuan frowned slightly and glanced at Song Jintang. It was painful to have the blood returned, but she didn't seem to care. She smiled and said to her grandmother coquettishly, "Don't blame him. I've been pestering him for a while and forgot about it." Grandma Shen felt sorry for her, this brat is just. He didn't care about Tang Tang. But this silly girl still protected him. Grandma Shen felt bad. Does it hurt? You too, you might as well rely on a wall than on him. How can you be so obsessed with a book? Song Jintang smiled without saying anything. Reading is so good. It can calm your mind and make you think positively. Otherwise, she would have been angry to death long ago. In fact, she felt that it was better to feel some pain, so that the feelings would be worn away sooner and she would not have such wishful thinking anymore. Chapter 011, I'm dirty. Song Jintang reinserted the needle, and Grandma Shen held her hand distressfully. Your hand is injured, and you can't even eat by yourself, do you understand? Song Jintang laughed, realizing that her grandmother was protecting her and looking for every opportunity to bring her together with Shen Yuyuan to enhance their relationship so that he and Lu Yingxi could be completely separated. But love cannot be forced, and a forced melon is not sweet. The two of them were together every Wednesday, but instead of being sweet and affectionate, Shen Yuyuan hated her even more. She knew that this trick of her grandmother's was useless, at least not on Shen Yuyuan. However, Song Jintang did not refuse Grandma's kindness and thanked her sweetly. She couldn't win Shen Yuyuan's heart, but she could make those who were good to her happy. Grandma Shen left not long after she arrived. Shen Yuyuan stood in front of the bed and glanced at her hand. Her skin was very white, so the blue spot was eye-catching and abrupt. He stared at her calmly for a long while before saying, "You are quite cruel to yourself." Song Jintang looked up. There was no emotion in his eyes. He looked as cold and calm as usual, but she could see the sarcasm and disdain in him. You see, no matter what she did, it was all calculation in his eyes. Since he didn't believe her defense, she might as well admit it. At least it would make him angry. "It does hurt a little, but it's worth it because you're here to accompany me and feed me later," Song Jintang said. It would be even better if she could see the look on Shen Yuyuan's face that said, "He can't stand me, but can't get rid of me." Shen Yuyuan's face turned cold, and he held her chin with his fingers. "Does it make sense to use the same old trick again? Yes, you come to my place every Wednesday. You were reluctant at first, but later you adjusted your schedule due to business trips. It shows that you are obsessed with my body. I think as long as we meet often, you will like me," Song Jintang said, wrapping her arms around his neck. Shen Yuyuan's eyes were dark and calm, with a suffocating indifference, and he said, "Every time I touch you, I feel dirty." Song Jintang took a breath. This was not the first time she had heard this, but her heart was still stabbed. After she and Shen Yuyuan had sex for the first time, he thought she had entered the room as a plot, so she went to explain. Outside his usual private room at the Li Guang Club, she heard Feng Lang eagerly asking, "Brother, you slept with Song Jintang, what about Sister Shi?" She stood at the door, looking at Shen Yuyuan's handsome face half hidden in the dim light. He rubbed his forehead and said, "I'm dirty and not worthy of her." Song Jintang will always remember that day, the heartbreaking feeling she felt after being hit by his words. If she dirted him, he would never touch Luingxi again, at least not during the marriage. If he touches it, it would be a poison to the person he loves most. Look, Shen Yuyuan put Luingxi in the softest place in his heart and pampered and cherished her. And I am not even a toy. Logically speaking, Shen Yuyuan was in love with Luingxi, and she was the third party who destroyed their relationship. After sorting out the whole story, she should have helped them to achieve their goal instead of marrying into the Shen family. But she is not the third party, so whether it is dirty or not is not up to Shen Yuyuan to say. She felt that she was in a really bad mood today. She glanced at the bruised back of her hand, a gleam of revenge flashed in her eyes, and she kissed Shen Yuyuan directly. Shen Yuyuan didn't expect that this woman was so shameless. Even after he said such words, she still pounced on him. When the woman's lips touched his, he subconsciously put himself on guard. But she put all her strength into hooking her arm around his neck and kissing him. Of course, today's kiss was completely different from the tender kisses she had given him in the past. She was biting him very hard, until the smell of blood filled the air between her lips and teeth. Then she said faintly, "I'm very cruel to myself, and I'll be even crueler to you." Then it swept across the country. Chapter 012, Leaving Evidence. A fierce and passionate kiss ended with both of their lips being broken and Song Jintang even pouting. Shen Yuyuan's chest was heaving violently, but the eyes he looked at her were dark and deep, like the sea before a storm, suppressing the turbulence and hiding the danger. After a long while, he slowly leaned over, pressed the blood drop on her lips with his bony fingers, and said, "You thought you could control me by letting the old couple put pressure on me. I went to bed with you, so you can control me. You are just a gift delivered to my door, so I will use you. What's more, you are Mrs. Shen. Since you like to play so much, I will accompany you." The man's voice was as soft as a love whisper, but Song Jintang really wanted to cry. Shen Yuyuan's words were so hurtful. She tried to push him away, but he easily pressed her wrist against her face. He sneered and lowered his head to bite her neck. She hated it, but she didn't want to be held down by him in such an embarrassing situation. During her fierce resistance, the bed tilted, and the bedside cabinet somehow fell over. The pear porridge that Grandma had worked so hard to cook was not spared and all spilled on the ground. When the nurse heard the noise, she thought something had happened, so she pushed the door open and was stunned to see the messy ward. Shen Yuyuan then calmed down, touched her head, and said softly, "Be good, I'll go home to you." Song Jintang's eyes widened. How could he be so shameless? Shen Yuyuan left. The nurse looked at the bruises on the back of her hand and the blood on her right hand. This is the first time I've seen someone get so bruised by an 4. Song Jintang took a look and felt a little embarrassed, regretting that he did not keep his composure. But this minor injury was nothing compared to the hurt Shen Yuyuan had caused her. She calmed down and said sweetly, "Sister, can I use your phone?" When she came to the hospital yesterday, her brother was so flustered that he didn't even put his phone down for her. When Shu Suihuan came back after receiving the call, she was completely shocked. She left so that Shen Yuyuan could get to know Song Jintang better and develop their relationship, but now they were fighting. Facing the questioning look from his friend, Song Jintang let out a sigh. "I couldn't help myself and got really mad, but I was never more mad than him." Shu Suihuan looked at Song Jintang's hands and kept scolding Shen Yuyuan for being a worthless person. When he had scolded him enough, he asked with a distressed look on his face, "Now, what should we do?" Song Jintang's eyelashes trembled, and she pursed her lips and said, "Take a picture of it. It can be regarded as evidence of Shen Yuyuan's domestic violence." Shu Suihuan sighed, "Are you willing to give up? It's so hard to finally be together. I'm not a masochist. Besides, you can't force his heart even if you force him to do something. Well, he won't divorce me after knowing that. The photos are a precaution." Shu Suihuan took a picture with his mobile phone, and his heart ached when he looked at his friend's hands. "I thought Song Jintang would be very happy after marrying Shen Yuyuan, but now, she must be numb from the pain, right?" After struggling for a long time, Song Jintang finally resumed the infusion. At 10:30, the medicine drip was finished, and Song Jintang changed his clothes and prepared to leave the hospital. Shu Suihuan was furious. "Do you know that the blood you drew yesterday was black? Why are you still fighting so hard?" Song Jintang patted her back and flattered her. "I have finished the injection. Mr. District will leave Tianjin at 5 o'clock. You know. I will come back immediately after this is over." Shu Zong hung up the phone and looked at his boss in the rearview mirror. His expression was indifferent, just like usual, but the atmosphere in the car made him feel creepy. When the boss came out of the ward and said, "Keep an eye on her," he knew that Song Jintang was up to something again. Shu Zong's eyes fell on his boss's broken lips for a long time before he stiffly reported, "Madam. No, Miss Song has been discharged from the hospital." Shen Yuyuan, who was looking at his phone, frowned and said, "Let her go back to the hospital." Shu Zong made a phone call immediately, but a man answered the phone. The phone was on speakerphone. Shen Yuyuan heard Song Jinzhao's voice and looked up. She didn't bring her cell phone today. He lowered his eyes, thinking of her bloody lips and blew back of her hands. Chapter 013, Mrs. Shen's Secret. Li Guanghui. Feng Lang pushed open the door of the box and saw his brother sitting alone in the corner of the sofa, looking at his phone. The cold light from the phone made his handsome face look a little chilly, but his slightly swollen lips were very ambiguous, which made people feel quite incongruous. Feng Lang was tactful and didn't dare to cause trouble, so he went to Shu Zong to inquire. Shu Zong briefly explained what happened in the hospital and Feng Lang was shocked. Song Jintang was indeed a talented person. Everyone in Jincheng was very respectful and polite when they saw Shen Yuyuan. Song Jintang has the courage to pull teeth out of a tiger's mouth. I really admire him. He thought, if it weren't for Lu Yingxi, Comrade Xiao Song might have really had a chance, as the two seemed to be a perfect match no matter how he looked at them. What happened next? Feng Lang asked again. The fight happened in the hospital, so his brother's face shouldn't be so bad. There must be a follow-up. After leaving the hospital, she went to the kitchen of the West City Hotel and stayed there for more than 3 hours to make 2 cakes for Mr. Chu. Mr. Chu then hugged Song Jintang. It's just a hug of thanks, is it nothing? Feng Lang said. Chu Jianan was a very eccentric person and did many things that did not follow the rules. It was obvious that it wasn't just an ordinary hug, it was. I can't explain it, Song Jintang even cried. Shen Yuyuan swiped the screen of his mobile phone with his bony fingers, looking at the photos. The man in the photo has his face buried in the woman's neck, as if he wants to embed her into his body. When they parted, he didn't even look back, but the woman stared in the direction he left and cried. The camera angles clearly recorded Song Jintang's sad look in each shot. Song Jintang cried. It was the first time Shen Yuyuan saw it. It turned out that behind this beautiful and arrogant woman, there was such a fragile side. This Mrs. Shen who came to his door had many secrets. Chu Jianan really doesn't like women. Shen Yuyuan asked. Feng Lang reacted quickly and explained immediately, he likes men and loves dancing. Everyone in Jintang knows it. Sister-in-law, well, Miss Song talked business with him and catered to his interests. There's nothing wrong with that, right? Shen Yuyuan asked coldly, really, and handed the phone over. Feng Lang looked at the photo and gasped, this, hugging, crying and so on, it must be a misunderstanding. It is said that Oyu Jianan just broke up with a young hunk recently. Shen Yuyuan held the wine glass with his fingers and glanced at her calmly. Chu Jianan broke up with her, why is she crying? Feng Lang was about to cry now. How would he know why Song Jintang was crying? After finishing the drink, Shen Yuyuan stood up, took back his phone, and said to Xu Zong, keep following. If this woman does anything immoral again, notify me immediately. Xu Zong, is it immoral? Song Jintang is capable, so she doesn't do this. Otherwise, she won't be able to revive the Song family's collapsed reputation. She doesn't know why their boss is prejudiced against people. As for the photo, he also thought it was a misunderstanding. Xu Zong could only complain in his heart, so he replied, okay, and stood up. Shen Yuyuan said he could go home from get off work, then he took his car keys and left. As soon as the door closed, Xu Zong wailed, Master Feng, what happened to my boss? Maybe, he's sexually unsatisfied. Otherwise he wouldn't be jealous of Chu Jianan. Impossible, that was sleeping with the emperor, I was forced into it. Feng Lang felt that Xu Zong was still too young. The first time, he forced me to believe it, but later, it was no longer the case. That was Song Jintang, a fairy-like person. Not to mention her waist and legs, her hair alone was so beautiful that it seemed to be covered with stars. Hey, does your boss try to avoid Wednesdays when he goes on business trips? Xu Zong thought about it, it's true. Addiction. Feng Lang raised his eyebrows and said, I guess he asked you to leave work, and he went to the hospital again. Men are just like that, they love face but like to think with their lower body. Chapter 014, Very Patient. Song Jintang was dreaming. On the chaotic and riotous streets, she was hugged tightly by someone, and someone was hysterically shouting, Tang Tang, Tang Tang. Her tears couldn't stop flowing, and she wanted to speak but no sound came out. Shen Yuyuan stood in front of the bed, and with the light from the corridor, he looked at the woman curled up on the bed and sobbing. She was in pain, as if she was possessed by a ghost. Because of Oyu Jianan? Shen Yuyuan looked at her coldly for a long time. It seemed that he had to investigate his Mrs. Shen carefully. Crying for another man, Shen Yuyuan snorted coldly, pinched her chin and kissed her. Song Jintang was out of breath. She opened her eyes and saw a familiar face. It was a dream, because Shen Yuyuan would not kiss her on his own initiative. She went forward with joy. It wasn't until she felt cold that she realized she wasn't dreaming. She pushed his shoulders and resisted, get out of the way, this is a hospital. I had such a big fight with him and now I want to do it again at night. How shameless. The two of them hadn't done it for a month, so Song Jintang was easily aroused, her body trembling slightly. In Shen Yuyuan's eyes, it was not rejection but playing it safe. He was even more excited and naturally would not stop. Song Jintang refused to cooperate and started scratching at the bedside cabinet again. Shen Yuyuan's face turned cold. He let out a breath, let go of her, wrapped her in his suit, and carried her out of the ward. Song Jintang realized where he was going. I'm not going, I'm not going. Scream as loud as you can, it's best if everyone in the hospital knows about it, he warned her. Song Jintang's face turned pale and she remained silent. Shen Yuyuan glanced at her coldly and said, it's not that car. Somehow, he knew what she cared about. She closed her eyes, knowing that she couldn't escape. Although he looked cold and indifferent, he was actually very domineering. It was late at night, and among the few cars scattered in the hospital's open-air parking lot, the flickering scarlet flames in a black car were particularly eye-catching. Shen Yuyuan leaned against the car door, looking at the woman who was resting her head on his legs in the dim yellow light. After a love affair, the blush on her body had not yet faded, and she looked very charming and not so pale anymore. Shen Yuyuan brought the cigarette between his fingers to his lips and took a puff. He lowered his head and the green smoke lingered on the delicate skin of her neck. Song Jintang choked and coughed, glaring at him angrily. Only now did he realize that Shen Yuyuan was both evil and a beast. This woman was particularly obedient tonight, which made Shen Yuyuan's usually gloomy brows brighter. He narrowed his eyes and asked her, do you like it? Song Jintang was stunned and looked up at Shen Yuyuan. His shirt was half open, revealing his abdominal muscles. He looked messy, sexy, and a little crazy and evil. The two of them had slept together many times, but this was the first time they had been so affectionate afterwards, and she didn't know how to respond. But Shen Yuyuan was extremely patient today, stroking her back again and again with his bony fingers, as if he was teasing his cat. After a while, he said, "I misunderstood you today, so I'll make it up to you. Do you want more? Song Jintang, you bastard. Is there any intention of compensation? You only cared about yourself the whole time." She ignored him. Shen Yuyuan lowered his head again and licked her ear affectionately. "I told you that you made Grandma come over to scold me, why don't you explain? Do you believe it?" She glanced at him. "I will believe it," he said, picking her up and sitting her on his lap, his lips continuing to entangle her ears. "I'm leaving. Will you be bored in the hospital?" Song Jintang was a little dazed, with him supporting her waist. The two of them were very intimate, as if they were really a loving couple. Maybe it was because she was sick, or maybe it was because the atmosphere was too good. She wanted to cry a little, pursed her lips and said, "I was not in the hospital this afternoon, I made 2 cakes. He smiled in her ear, looking surprised. "You can also bake cakes." "I will also." "A lot." Before he could finish his words, his cell phone rang. Shen Yuyuan put out the cigarette and took out his cell phone. Song Jintang glanced at it casually and saw Lu Yingshi's name flashing on the screen. Chapter 15, You Owe Her. Song Jintang lost the desire to share. She had originally been craving for this little warmth and was leaning peacefully in his arms, but suddenly she felt very uncomfortable. Shen Yuyuan stared at his phone, his dark eyes dark, and no one knew what he was thinking. After a long while, he slowly picked up the phone. "Yuyuan, you're not at home." "Yeah," he responded. "Where have you been?" "I have something to ask you." The carriage was very quiet, and even without the loudspeaker, she could hear the conversation between the two people clearly. Song Jintang smiled and wanted to see how he would answer. After all, his clothes were not even properly put on. Shen Yuyuan did not answer immediately. Instead, he pinched her chin and stared at her with a serious look. Song Jintang suddenly felt that he was quite a scumbag. Maybe all men are like this. Even if they have someone in their heart, it doesn't stop them from flirting and playing games with others. Song Jintang suddenly felt a little nauseous and wanted to leave, but he held her waist. The man's eyes were cold, as if warning her not to make a sound. She sneered, "Is it so easy to enjoy the happiness of having many wives?" Besides, she had never been a very obedient person, especially to his words, and she struggled to get off him. Shen Yuyuan's eyes remained calm as he pulled the suit covering her shoulders off. "Song Jintang, I didn't expect this man to be so bad." When he carried her downstairs, she was only wearing his suit. She wanted to get out of the car, but she couldn't be half naked, right? The person on the phone waited for a long time, but he still couldn't speak, so he said, "Are you in the hospital?" Shen Yuyuan said, Song Jintang pulled his suit and put it on, but did not get out of the car and continue to be abused. In fact, Lu Yingshi and he have a good understanding and they understand each other. Shen Yuyuan probably didn't want to lie to her, so he used silence instead of explanation. Her eyes fell out the window and she suddenly felt very cold. She wrapped her clothes tightly around herself but still felt cold, so cold that her eyes became misty. "Is Miss Song feeling better?" Lu Yingshi asked politely. "Yeah, much better." Shen Yuyuan glanced at her. At least her face was still rosy and bright. "What happened to you?" "It's not my business. I heard that the China-UK trade fair is scheduled to be held at the Song's West City Hotel. You happen to be at Miss Song's place. Can you talk to her about giving this project to Luz?" Song Jintang widened his eyes. How shameless is it? How can someone steal business like this? Just as she was about to open her mouth, the man's finger landed between her lips, and she heard Shen Yuyuan say, "Okay, I'll discuss it with her." Lu Yingshi thanked him sweetly on the phone, said, "I love you," and hung up. Shen Yuyuan threw his phone aside and began to button his clothes slowly. "I'll trade you a project." Song Jintang's throat ached bitterly. "I won't change." The business deal at the negotiation meeting was made by her drinking with him this month, and she became so sick because of it. After spending so much time and effort, why should she give up just because of one sentence? "I'm not discussing this with you." he said, his shirt tucked into his trousers, looking neat and cold. Even the ambiguous and charming atmosphere in the car was dissipated, leaving only the coldness. Why? She wanted to yell, but her throat was still sore. You owe her this. Shen Yuyuan said, his eyes turning cold. Is this still the lover who was so affectionate to her? I'm not a mistress, she said, looking into his deep eyes. He said he would believe her explanation. Shen Yuyuan seemed to have heard a joke. Is it true? You don't know it yourself. You see, you can't believe what a man says when he takes off his pants. Song Jintang looked away, his nails digging into the flesh of his palms. The first time he and Shen Yuyuan were together was in the top-floor suite of the West City Hotel. He had booked the entire floor and decorated the room beautifully. That night, he was going to propose to Lu Yingxi, but she was in his bed. He would satisfy Lu Yingxi's request, not to mention that she owed him money. Shen Yuyuan told her that he was already giving her face, and given his status and position, everything could be settled with just a word from the Commerce Bureau. Shen Yuyuan, what should I do to keep this project? What do you have? Yes, compared to Lu Yingxi, what could she have that he could cherish? Song Jintang took off her clothes and smiled seductively. Is this body okay? Chapter 16, I won't give him a child. Shen Yuyuan's eyes turned cold. Was it worth it for this project to make her like this? If someone else asked her to do this, would she do it without hesitation? Shen Yuyuan's eyes were as cold as a knife, and he suddenly laughed. Boss Song, you are quite bold. He felt sorry for her being sick and in the car, so he didn't enjoy it very much and ended it hastily. Now it's interesting, I've been in business for so many years, and there have been many women throwing themselves at me, but it's rare for a wife to throw herself at me. He went hard on her without any foreplay. Song Jintang felt uncomfortable all over, but he still gritted his teeth and endured it. It would be ridiculous to tell anyone that a wife climbs into her husband's bed just to get a business deal. No matter what, Lu cannot take this business away. She was not angry with Lu Yingxi, but because this small project in Shen Yuyuan's eyes was too important to the Song family. After his father passed away and his mother went crazy, the Song family's former hotel empire was divided up among various parties. All that remained in the hands of her siblings were a few old city hotels of low value and an unopened West City Hotel. The West City Hotel has enjoyed a good reputation since its opening. It needs the continued support of such high-end business associations and endorsement from local departments with voice and influence, and the hotel will develop steadily. Moreover, the West City Hotel is only a few miles away from the International Convention and Exhibition Center. The negotiation meeting was not held at the West City Hotel, but instead at the faraway Lu's Hotel. This was a big blow to the Song family, which had finally recovered. So no matter what the cost, she must protect this project. But Song Jintang still didn't like the feeling of falling into depravity while being sober, especially when the person on him was Shen Yuyuan. This matter could no longer make her happy. She bit her lips tightly to avoid making any sound, and felt that Shen Yuyuan was not worthy of seeing her like this. She clung to his shoulders and tears fell. Maybe she was too tired from supporting the company, or maybe it was because the illness made people fragile, or maybe it was because her heart still ached and she felt wronged, so she shed a lot of tears. When it was over, she was still sober. Shen Yuyuan no longer had the satisfaction he had the first time, and his face looked very bad, but he still carried her to take a bath. After lying on the bed, Song Jintang fell asleep exhausted, but her sleep was not serene. In the second half of the night, she felt as if she was in a sea of fire. She was about to be burned to death. It seemed that the thick smoke made her unable to breathe. She seemed to hear footsteps again, many people coming in and out, but she didn't have the strength to open her eyes. When she woke up again, all she saw was still white. There was a person lying beside the bed. She calmed herself down and reached out to touch his head. The person lying on the ground suddenly raised his head and said, "Sister, you finally woke up. I was scared to death." Song Jinchao's eyes were full of bloodshot and his beard was untidy, but his hand swiftly fell on her forehead, trying to see if she still had a fever. "How long have I slept?" 2 days. Song Jinchao said, his eyes reddened, and he added, "You caught a cold and developed severe pneumonia and were admitted to the emergency room. I will take good care of myself in the future, don't be sad." Song Jintang comforted him, "Where's your sister Huan Huan?" "She went to cook porridge for you, fearing that you would be hungry when you wake up." Song Jintang nodded. "By the way, how is the business negotiation meeting going?" Didn't you agree on everything? Song Jintang said, it seemed that Shen Yuyuan had not taken any action yet. For the meeting at the Commerce Bureau, contact the translator in advance to do simultaneous interpretation, so as not to make any mistakes. Song Jincha was sent away by his sister to handle official business. He was worried and did not leave until Xu Suihuan came. Xu Suihuan served the porridge and couldn't help but sarcastically said, "You caught a cold," and asked your family to sign a critical illness notice. Have you not been taking your medicine on time recently? No, I'm taking my cold medicine seriously. Did I say cold medicine? Song Jintang looked up in confusion. Is it birth control pills? You really have to buy me some 72-hour emergency contraception. She would not give birth to a child for Shen Yuyuan. She tried to interrupt, but Xu Suihuan was too lazy to say anything else and pushed the porridge to her. You can fend for yourself. Chapter 17, Hug Her Like That revised. Song Jintang lay in bed for 2 days and didn't dare eat much porridge for fear of gastrointestinal discomfort. She strolled around the ward for a while, then curled up on the sofa to relax. The warm sunlight felt comfortable on her body and also made her mind clearer. This cold was so severe that it served as a reminder for her to be kind to her body and love herself. Thinking of the business deal at the negotiation meeting, she was a little dazed. When Xu Suihuan came back from buying medicine, he saw her staring at her phone with a frown on her face, and he got angry. Can you be obedient and have a good rest? Song Jintang briefly told Xu Suihuan what happened that night. Xu Suihuan fell silent and gave her an extra pill, fearing that the drug would not work and she would get pregnant. After she took the medicine, Xu Suihuan spoke cautiously, Shen Yuyuan won't help the Lu family because of your serious illness, right? Song Jintang was not so naive. She had a cold and was suffering from respiratory failure and critical condition. In Shen Yuyuan's eyes, this might be a self-torture trick. He had just done such a depraved thing that night, and now there was a new change, which would only make him more disgusted. Besides, since it involved Lu Yingxi, he would not change his mind. She didn't say anything. Xu Suihuan became anxious and kept scolding Shen Yuyuan. Song Jintang became indifferent and advised her friend to save her energy. As for the business, she had a way to do it. She was just a little impatient that day and couldn't think straight, so she made the bad decision. Shen Yuyuan came in carrying porridge, and Song Jintang had a calm expression. But Xu Suihuan didn't hold back, and said coldly that she had eaten, and then asked him with a smile, "Have you ever heard of the saying that belated love is cheaper than grass?" Shen Yuyuan frowned and looked at Xu Suihuan with great indifference. Xu Suihuan sneered, gave him a look that said, "This day will come to you sooner or later," and left the ward. Song Jintang quickly tried to smooth things over and changed the subject. "I can eat a little more of the porridge that grandma cooked." Shen Yuyuan served her some, pursed his lips, and asked, "Do you need me to feed you?" "I can do it myself." She was already well, and she didn't need it anymore. Shen Yuyuan frowned as he watched her eat the porridge in small mouthfuls. His eyes swept to the medicine box on the coffee table. He picked it up and took a look. "Have you eaten?" His eyes were cold, and there was a depth in his black pupils that was difficult to understand. Song Jintang nodded. "You don't want such an accident to happen, do you?" Shen Yuyuan said, This marriage would end soon, so what was the point of having a child? She did the right thing, but he felt irritated for no reason. His reaction was expected. Song Jintang stopped eating the porridge and said calmly, "You are busy. You don't have to come here on purpose." "I won't tell grandma." Shen Yuyuan didn't respond, but just looked at her coldly, and she felt that the atmosphere was becoming a little tense. She knew what to do and stopped talking, just sitting on the sofa sending WeChat messages. The West City Hotel lacks such experience in the China-UK trade fair. So, it has to be given to lose? Song Jintang was calmer than before, put down his phone, and agreed with him. "Well, West City Hotel has indeed never accepted such a meeting. I will sell it to you for 30 million. He agreed readily, and soon Xu Zong handed over the checkbook, which was from Shen Yuyuan's private account. This matter is over. The next day, Shen Yuyuan came again with porridge, and the same on the third day. But he was very busy and spent most of his time dealing with official business, while she just read books and didn't talk much, so they got along quite well. She was discharged from the hospital on the afternoon of the fourth day, and Lu Yingxi came with Shen Yuyuan. Shen Yuyuan went to the hospital to be discharged. Lu Yingxi helped her pack her things and said that she was very grateful to her and would go through fire and water to help her if she could be of any use in the future. Song Jintang laughed out loud. Ms. Lu, you are too happy too early. No matter who gets the business from the negotiation meeting, it will not fall on the Lu family. Chapter 018, I feel sorry for you. Song Jintang received the check and saw her friend looking unhappy. She smiled and said, don't feel sad for me. I have recognized the reality. He only has Lu Yingxi in his heart and there is no place for me. I have coveted a person who doesn't love me and hurt me for more than half a year. I am so stupid. I don't want him anymore. I just want to make money and make the company better. Xu Suiwan hugged her and cried, but you've suffered so much for him, and I just don't think it's worth it for you. I know you've been running around for the business of this negotiation meeting, and you've been begging people, but Shen Yuyuan wanted to please Lu. She couldn't continue, afraid of hurting her again. Song Jintang comforted his friend, saying that no matter who got the business, it would not belong to Lu's. Xu Suiwan didn't believe it at first. She assured him again and again, but she was still skeptical. Then these 30 million. My mental damages. You know my temper. I did something so ridiculous that day because I was so angry that I couldn't think straight. Actually, I don't need to beg Shen Yuyuan to keep my business. And I won't just let myself be bullied forever. They keep abusing me in different ways, so I have to fight back, right? Fighting back is good, of course. But if you scheme against Shen Yuyuan like this, nothing good will come of it. Shen Yuyuan, a nobleman from Tianjin, seems to be indifferent to everything, but as the heir to the largest chaebol, he is also ruthless and capable. Otherwise, in a family with many children and grandchildren like the Shen family, it would not be his turn to be the new head of the family. Song Jintang sneered, can it be more unpalatable than the fruit now? When you like someone, you always want to show all your good qualities to the other person in order to get a response and equal love from the other person. Of course, you are also willing to suffer for love. But only if a person loves herself well can she be loved by others. If she loses herself, anyone can bully her. Just look at the attitudes of Shen Yuyuan and Lu Yingxi. Xu Suiwan thought about it and agreed. No matter what decision her friend made, she would support her. Song Jintang stayed in the hospital until the afternoon of the fourth day and was discharged. Every morning Shen Yuyuan would leave the porridge cooked by his grandmother and go. She didn't tell Grandma Shen how seriously ill she was because she didn't want to upset the old lady. When she was discharged from the hospital, she met Lu Yingxi in the hospital parking lot. She drove here by herself, with the window of the driver's seat rolled down, and the two of them looked at each other from a distance. She didn't want to get off the car, nor did she want to move forward. Xu Suiwan originally liked Lu Yingxi. She was pretty, had good acting skills, and was dedicated, but now he realized that she was a master at playing two sides. What on earth is she trying to do, to demonstrate? Song Jintang smiled and said, she is also quite pitiful. Xu Suiwan's eyes widened. You are not mistaken, she is not pitiful at all. Song Jintang retracted his gaze and got into the car. You'll know then. You can't just look at the surface when judging people or things. True and false. Song Jintang leaned in the passenger seat and replied on WeChat, if you want to fight to the death, you don't have to agree. Then he turned off his phone and replied to his friend, whether it's true or not, wait and see. Xu Suiwan knew his friend well and never spoke without thinking, so he didn't ask any more questions and sent the man to the West City Hotel. Song Jinchao went to her sister to report on her work, saying that there were rumors that the negotiation meeting would be held at Lu's and the contract would be signed in the next few days. Song Jintang didn't say much, but just asked her brother to arrange what she had instructed before. Song Jinchao agreed, sister, my brother-in-law asked Xu Zong to investigate you. I think he will soon find out who it was more than half a year ago. Who sent her to Shen Yuyuan's room? Song Jintang was distracted for a moment, just know it if you know it, it's not a secret. You don't have to worry about me. Song Jinchao swallowed the words that were on the tip of his tongue, then clenched his fists and said, sister, he doesn't feel sorry for you, but I do, and I will always protect you. Chapter 019, You Are So Beautiful. It is rumored that the venue for the trade fair will be in a hotel owned by Lu Group, and the contract will be signed soon. Song Jintang has never received a call from the leader she was in contact with. As long as that leader doesn't call, it means there is still a chance. However, on Friday morning, the leader called and first expressed his position, saying that he personally had a high opinion of the West City Hotel, but he could not make the decision on this matter. He also tactfully reminded her that she could go find Shen Yuyuan. Song Jintang understood the leader's difficulties very well. The Shen family had made great contributions to the local area since his grandfather. In the years since Shen Yuyuan took over the company, not only had the company achieved outstanding results, but he also inherited his grandfather's aspirations and made great efforts in public welfare. The Shen family is one of the representatives of modern Confucian businessmen. The meaning was very clear. Shen Yuyuan had a hand in this, so they had to give him some face. Although she knew that Shen Yuyuan would help the Lu family, she still felt a little embarrassed when she heard someone else say it in person. As his wife, she felt indescribable embarrassment. However, she did not let herself sink into a bad mood. It was not worth it for such a small thing. She said a lot of nice things to her leader, and after ending the call, she went back to work. At noon, Oyu Jianan told her on WeChat that he would make an appointment with her to play tennis at 3 p.m. Song Jintang thought it was a good idea, so she went to their hotel's western kitchen to make tiramisu and egg tarts, and brought them to the tennis court. However, she didn't expect to meet Shen Yuyuan in the gym. He was right next to the venue booked by Chu Jianan. When he saw her, his cold brows frowned slightly, but she still caught it. He didn't want to see her. Did she look happy to see him? Song Jintang rolled his eyes at him, then greeted Xu Zong with a smile. Xu Zong waved at her happily, but when the words were about to come out of his mouth, he saw their boss's face turned cold and he swallowed them back in fear. Now he can't talk to his wife. Song Jintang didn't care. She turned around and sat on the lounge chair waiting for Chu Jianan. After a while, he came with equipment. She stood up and walked towards him, asking him coldly, "Did you do this on purpose?" Chu Jianan nodded. "Yes, I see that you are in a miserable situation, so I want to help you." As he said that, he put his arm on her shoulders and leaned towards her. Song Jintang really admires Oyu Jianan. He always interferes in her and Shen Yuyuan's affairs, hoping that the world will not be in chaos. She raised her legs to leave, but Oyu Jianan grabbed her and said, "If you leave like this, you'll be embarrassing me. I'll beat you for an hour. If I meet him, I have to leave." "Why?" "I just go to change clothes." Song Jintang said, "It's not her who did anything wrong." Chu Jianan went to say hello. After all, everyone was in the same circle, so they had to be polite to each other. When Song Jintang came back after changing her clothes, she felt that the atmosphere was not right. Xu Zong looked at her with an expression as if he wanted to say something but hesitated. Shen Yuyuan's eyes were colder than before. Chu Jianan was the happiest, smiling like a cat that had stolen some fish. "You are so beautiful that it is incomparable," Chu Jianan suddenly said. Song Jintang raised his eyebrows, "I'm not only good looking today." Oyu Jianan smiled even more happily. He liked Song Jintang's character of not compromising herself. He deliberately pushed her to the opposite side and stood on the same side with Shen Yuyuan. Although they were not in the same place, they were close to each other. Song Jintang was not a pretentious person, he just walked over with his racket in his hand. Shen Yuyuan glanced at her dazzlingly white long legs and said in a deep voice, "You're wearing this to play basketball?" Song Jintang was stunned, curled the corners of her lips, and asked with a smile, "Mr. Shen, do you think I'm wearing too much or too little?" She was wearing a very normal tennis outfit, so why did she dress like this to play tennis? If she's annoying, just ignore her. Why do you want to meddle in other people's affairs? Chapter 20, My Wife. The tennis outfit Song Jintang wore today was very French style. The red sleeveless top made her look very sexy and charming, but it had a white V-neck and was paired with white shorts. She looked really charming and fairy-like. She jumped up to hit the ball, and her slender, snow-white waist was revealed again. Shen Yuyuan frowned deeply. His waist, arms and legs were all exposed. It was so obvious, and you still had the nerve to ask him if he was wearing too much or too little. Xu Zong saw that he was about to take notice of his wife, so he hurried over to remind her that Mr. Zhu, who was playing basketball with him, was a client. Shen Yuyuan finally collected his thoughts and walked to the net to explain to the other party, "My wife." Xu Zong's eyes widened when he heard this. This was the first time his boss explained to others that Song Jintang was his wife. Somehow, Xu Zong's eyes were filled with tears. When he looked at Song Jintang, she was playing basketball seriously. What a pity, their wife didn't he hear it. Mr. Zhu smiled and said, "My little wife." Shen Yuyuan nodded. He was not much older than Song Jintang, 5 or 6 years older, or maybe older. At this moment, Shen Yuyuan felt a little guilty for some reason. Your skills are pretty good. Next time, bring my husband along and we can play a game together, Mr. Zhu added. Shen Yuyuan said, okay, looked back, and found that Song Jintang was quite confident in his hitting, and he could probably get a place in the domestic amateur tennis competition. After he withdrew his gaze, it fell on Xu Zong, even colder than before. Xu Zong has been his assistant for more than 4 years. How could he not know what his eyes meant? Song Jintang is such a good player, it's normal that he hasn't found out about this yet. How could he be killed by his eyes? Both sides have started playing normally. Xu Zong still felt that Mrs. Song was truly amazing and very capable. If it weren't for Chu Jianan's physical strength suppressing her with his 1.80-meter tall figure, he would have lost in a very ugly way. An hour later, Yu Jianan went to the court and lay dead. Song Jintang went over and kicked him twice. Get up, you're old, you'll get cramps if you don't stretch. Yu Jianan glanced at her and got angry. I'm only in my 30s, what's the point of me being old? Okay, you're a grown man and I'm a girl. Isn't it embarrassing to be in this state after playing basketball? Yu Jianan has lived to such an old age that she never cares about other people's opinions, let alone the problem of embarrassment. I am also a woman. Song Jintang choked and forgot that he was a bottom. The game ended here, but Shen Yuyuan lost a few balls due to mistakes. President Zhu stopped with a smile and said to him, you look absent-minded. It's meaningless even if I win today. Chu Jianan will not like your wife even if he likes you. Are you really going to stick to her? You should be more broad-minded. Women should also have careers and social life. Mr. Zhu, who seemed a few years older than him, patted him on the shoulder and was about to leave. Shen Yuyuan was a little helpless. After thinking for a while, he said, Brother Zhu, when you married Mrs. Zhu, you took a year's wedding leave. When you wanted another year's maternity leave, the board of directors almost had a collective stroke. No one can compare to the way he clings to his wife. What's wrong with him taking a few glances? President Zhu paused and turned back. Since you call me brother, I will say a few more words. Please deal with your matter as soon as possible. It's also thanks to your low profile that not many people know about your affair with that person. But there is no such thing as a wall that is impenetrable. You want both, but you can't get either one. Once you've made up your mind about who you want, break up with the other immediately, or you'll suffer. Belated affection is cheaper than grass. Is this based on experience? Mr. Zhu also said calmly, forget it. If I hadn't lost half my life, Mrs. Zhu, my son would call someone else dad. Shen Yuyuan pondered for a moment and said he understood. In the time it took to say these few words, Song Jintang disappeared from the field. President Zhu waved his hand and said there was no need to see him off. Only then did Shen Yuyuan go to look for him. Just as Song Jintang was about to enter the women's locker room, someone grabbed her wrist. Chapter 021, All Fake. She turned around and it was Shen Yuyuan. He was wearing sportswear and looked very young and elegant, less cold and gloomy than before. Song Jintang's eyes fell from him to her wrist. She leaned lazily against the wall behind her and half raised her head. Are we continuing to discuss the issue of clothes? Although she was smiling, the smile did not reach her eyes and was rather mocking. Let me talk to you, he said, letting go of her wrist. What are you talking about? She answered absent-mindedly, then raised her eyes. I haven't been discussing any big deals recently, so I don't have any potential customers to dig up. Shen Yuyuan's face was indifferent, but the corners of his lips were still pressed down unhappily, looking down at her condescendingly. Her eyes are extremely beautiful, long and upturned, with a blush around them due to exercise, and the borders of her dark eyes are hazy and misty, as if they contain a pool of spring water. Why does such a good-looking person always speak in a sarcastic way and make people unhappy? Isn't this matter over? If you feel unbalanced, why did you propose it to me in the first place? Song Jintang. Listen, we want to talk, can we start a conversation? I don't want money. If I wait for you to take my business away, I will get nothing. Do I look that stupid? If you don't want to give up the project, you can tell me, he said, his voice a little colder. It's disgusting that you make a decision against your will when you are obviously unwilling to do so. Then you bring up the old matter again after making the decision. Didn't I express my wishes, Shen Yuyuan? She asked him in a cold voice. After asking, Song Jintang regretted it again. Whenever the two of them talked, they would always have an argument. She knew this would happen, but she just didn't learn her lesson and tried to persuade him. I'm talking about when you wake up from being sick. Song Jintang let out a breath and looked down at the tip of his shoes. For me, it makes no difference, and for you too, okay, this matter has passed, and it won't make it clear if we discuss it again. I think we can just forget about chatting. After all, chatting has never been pleasant. No, it's never been pleasant no matter what we do. Including in bed. Shen Yuyuan was silent, lowering his eyes to look at her flushed neck. Beads of sweat slid down her slender neck into her collar and disappeared. He remembered that if the two of them were this close to each other in the past, she would definitely stick to him with a smile and lick his ears. But she didn't know since when she started to be like this anymore. Even the last time in the hospital, she pounced on him just to bite him. Is her transformation due to Oyu Jianan? Shen Yuyuan's voice sank. What's going on between you and Chu Jianan? Song Jintang was a little confused. After a moment's pause, he looked at him and replied, what's going on? He is my client, my god. Your client, God, told me personally before the game that he has decided to like women, and that's fine with you. Song Jintang said, oh, no wonder these people had such strange expressions when she changed her clothes. He said he likes women, and you believe him? He likes men, just like you don't like men. It's in the genes, how can it be changed? Song Jintang explained, without taking her eyes off his face, then raised her red lips and curled her eyes. Are you jealous? Shen Yuyuan sneered, do you think so? Song Jintang rolled her eyes. She couldn't take a joke, so serious, but she said tenderly, you are jealous, as out climbing a tree. I am just being sentimental, don't mind it. Song Jintang, stop interrupting me here. If you want to have a simple client relationship with Chu Jianan, can I ask you? Why did he hug you and why did you cry in front of him? He lost his patience. When Song Jintang heard this, he remembered that day in the car. It was the only time they were affectionate after sex, and it was also the only time the two of them had a semi-pleasant chat. If Luingshi's phone call hadn't interrupted them, they would have been happier. That day, he asked her casually if she was bored in the hospital. It turned out to be a beauty trap. Shen Yuyuan kept saying that she was calculating, but he was the one who was calculating thoroughly from beginning to end. She was so stupid that she thought her beautiful body could make him obsessed, so that he could understand her and love her. But Shen Yuyuan put her in a position where she can only use her body but never her heart, just to control her and prevent any accidents from happening. Thinking back to that day, his voice was so gentle and she was so moved. They are all fake. Chapter 022, You Never Hug Me. Song Jintang looked at her legs, which were very white, very long, and had beautiful lines. Because she has always felt that whether it is a man or a woman, they must make themselves look good, because the body belongs first to themselves and their loved ones. But he just doesn't love her. He is not her lover. When she married him, she thought she would be happy and sweet, but so far there has not been a single moment of that kind. She had been feeling very uncomfortable, so uncomfortable that she no longer wanted the person in front of her. But her heart was not listening. She had told herself not to worry about him, but she still felt very hurt. This might be what Xu Suihuan told her. Even if you want to forget someone, you need to do it step by step, otherwise your body won't be able to bear it. Song Jintang took a deep breath to suppress the suffocating discomfort in her heart, and calmly explained to Shen Yuyuan, Chu Jianan hugged me to thank me for making 2 cakes for him. I cried, because his hug was very warm. No man's hug has ever made me feel so warm. I am touched, right? After all, you never hug me. Even when they were most intimate, she was always clinging to him. Her words made Shen Yuyuan look extremely ugly. Seeing his expression, Song Jintang suddenly smiled apologetically. I shouldn't have said that. After all, it's all my own fault. I knew you didn't like me, but I insisted on marrying you, and even let your grandparents put pressure on you. I deserve it. Song Jintang's words were somewhat deliberate, meant to poke at his heart. He has a woman outside whom he takes great care of. She just hugged him, and he is blaming her for this? We are all adults. No matter whether it is marriage, work, or life, even if there are many frustrations, in the end it is the best choice made after weighing the pros and cons. We cannot blame others. After all, he, Shen Yuyuan, was not as honest as her. In love, he let down Lu Yingxi, and in marriage, he let down Song Jintang. Shen Yuyuan lived to be over 30 years old, and he thought he had a clear conscience and had never done anything wrong to anyone, but now her few words left him speechless. Her explanation about her and Ou Jianan was untenable. The way Ou Jianan hugged her that day was not out of gratitude at all. It was obvious that she was a very important person to him. Although he knew she was lying, he couldn't ignore her feelings like before. He questioned her for a long time before he moved his lips and said, "From now on. In the future." She didn't wait for him to finish, she continued, "I will be careful with the client and not let anyone take pictures. Of course, you have to protect Miss Lu. If something goes wrong here, I really can't help you. Husband, don't you think this is reasonable?" As Song Jintang spoke, he did not forget to straighten his collar. To outsiders, they looked like a very loving couple. Shen Yuyuan looked at her. It turned out that Mrs. Shen was very harsh when she satirized people. It was like a knife stabbing into his heart. For the first time, Song Jintang felt that she had won the confrontation between the two. She felt that it was about time, so she stopped paying attention to Shen Yuyuan and went into the locker room. By the time she finished taking a shower and changing her clothes, Shen Yuyuan had already left. Song Jintang left the tennis court with her bag on her back. When she arrived at the parking lot, she saw Ou Jianan leaning on her car smoking. She walked over and looked at the cigarette in his hand. "I want one too." Ou Jianan raised his eyes to look at her. "Didn't you quit long ago?" "Just one." "Not even one will do. If you smoke this one, there will be another one. All your previous efforts will be wasted." As he said this, he put out the cigarette between his fingers and stopped tempting her. "Why are you unhappy? Are you unhappy that I planned for you to come to see him, or are you unhappy that he didn't please you? I think the effect was good today. As soon as you appeared, he never took his eyes off you. Try hard, it will definitely work." Song Jintang was silent. Ou Jianan reached out and touched her head. "Okay, I promise not to get involved in your affairs. I support whatever decision you make, but, girl, some people are missed forever, understand?" Song Jintang's eyes were red again. Chu Jianan looked at her, opened the back door of her car, took out the cake and egg tarts, and got into his own car without looking back. In another car in the parking lot, Xu Zong glanced at his boss in the rearview mirror. He didn't stare at his wife today, but just looked out the window absent-mindedly. Chapter 23, Pregnant. Xu Zong didn't know what happened to his boss. When he came out of the tennis court, he didn't even change his clothes. His face was calm and indifferent, but he just felt that his boss was in a very bad state, worse than ever before. But he couldn't tell what the difference was. Maybe his eyes were too direct. The boss looked at him and asked, "How is it?" "It's similar to last time." This time, the cake that district president took away was tiramisu, and it seemed there were some egg tarts. Tiramisu. Shen Yuyuan suddenly felt a throbbing pain in his forehead. He also frequently thought of the day in the hospital when Song Jintang swallowed the contraceptive pill without a moment's hesitation, without even asking him or even looking at it. "The meaning of tiramisu is to take me away, right?" he asked. Xu Zong said, He saw from the rearview mirror that his boss's forehead was beginning to sweat. He took a breath and asked, "Sir, you have a headache again." "I haven't had any problems in the past 6 months, why did I suddenly?" Xu Zong started the car while contacting the doctor. Shen Yuyuan propped up his forehead with his fingers, his lips turning a little pale. "Xu Zong. Yes, I am. She's not playing hard to get, is she?" Xu Zong doesn't he know how to answer now? Will his answer make his headache worse? He hesitated for a moment, and the person in the back seat became impatient and said, "Speak." No. Right? This is a game of hard to get. Isn't it a bit long to play hard to get? Xu Zong said this with a stiff upper lip. The boss didn't say anything else. He pursed his lips tightly, pressed his forehead which was covered with cold sweat, and looked depressed. Shen Yuyuan had a headache, and Song Jintang was sitting in the driver's seat. After listening to several voice messages, his face looked bad and he was very annoyed. Just as she was worrying, Grandma Shen called her and said she had made her favorite dumplings and asked her if she had time to come over. She had been ill and had not yet visited the old house, but she agreed. On the way, she brought some delicious snacks for her grandmother. When she arrived, Grandma Shen was busy in the kitchen, and only Shen Yuyuan's half-sister Shen Nansen was in the living room looking at her mobile phone. When Shen Nansen saw her, he reluctantly called her sister-in-law, then lowered his head and continued to look at his phone. Except for the old couple, everyone else in the Shen family recognizes Lu Yingxi and doesn't like her. What's more, the girl in the Shen family is a brother con. Song Jintang didn't care much and went to help in the kitchen. Grandma Shen was very happy to see her and asked her to wash her hands and prepare for dinner. After the meal, Grandma Shen talked to her for a long time, and the topic finally turned to the negotiation meeting. The old man has now retreated behind the scenes, but he is well informed. Song Jintang held his grandmother's hand and said, "Don't listen to the nonsense outside. We are fine. We played ball together in the afternoon. Being so close, it can also be considered playing ball, right? You don't have to try to make me happy, Tang Tang. Your grandfather and I have always been on your side. No matter what decision you make, we will support you." Grandma Shen said that it was her grandson who let her down. He had to take care of a cold and even had to go to the emergency room, which shows that he doesn't care at all. Even if the girl is interested in him, his heart is as cold as a stone. It can't warm her up and it makes her feel upset. Who would care about her? Grandma Shen really liked Song Jintang. It was his blessing that his grandson married her, but she couldn't bear it. The girl had been wronged in his house. You have time in the future. Come and see Grandma, okay? The old lady's eyes were red, and Song Jintang also felt uncomfortable. The old couple knew about her and Shen Yuyuan, and she couldn't hide her thoughts from them. She nodded, leaned on her grandmother's shoulder, and whispered a few words. The old lady smiled and squinted her eyes. Shen Nansen went to the side hall to say goodbye to his grandmother. Seeing the two of them like a family, he frowned, but said affectionately, "Sister-in-law, I'm not driving today. Can you give me a ride?" After saying goodbye to the old couple, they left together. Shen Nansen got into her car. As soon as the door closed, she spoke, "Song Jintang, sister, she followed my brother when she was 18 years old and got pregnant with him. If the baby hadn't suddenly fallen when she was more than 8 months old, I would have become an aunt. Even if you please my grandparents, can you give birth to a child?" Chapter 24, Greed, so pitiful. Song Jintang was shocked. She's pregnant, and she's already 8 months pregnant. When did this happen? It's been more than 4 years. Shen Nansen answered her, raised his chin arrogantly, and said, "They are deeply in love. I advise you not to waste your energy. No matter how much you struggle, my brother only has sister Shi in his heart and won't even look at you. Why did she lose her baby?" Shen Nansen's face froze. "Song Jintang, am I telling you this just to gossip? This stupid woman, why doesn't she listen to the point?" Song Jintang wanted to ask something, but seeing that Shen Nansen was so angry that he was about to burst into flames, he shut up. She really didn't expect that Lu Yingxi was actually 8 months pregnant 4 years ago. It was almost full term, but the child was not born. It was such a pity. Shen Nansen looked over and saw Song Jintang with a calm expression, driving seriously. "Hearing that your husband had a child with another woman, this is your reaction?" Shen Nansen was going crazy. "Song Jintang, you don't love my brother at all." Song Jintang glanced at her and asked, "If I don't love him, why would I marry him? Loving someone will never be like this." Song Jintang sneered, "After hearing what you said about them, I was furious and that's how I showed my love for him. Come on, give up loving yourself to love someone else, that's stupid." Although she had done it before, people have to grow up eventually. Shen Nansen choked and looked at her for a second longer. If Song Jintang hadn't gone to great lengths to marry his brother, maybe the two of them could have been friends. She also feels that even if you love someone, you must love yourself first. The two didn't communicate anymore after that. When they arrived at the place, Shen Nansen said that she was just there to deliver something and then left. Miss Shen treated her as a driver, which made her unhappy. However, for the sake of the two elders of the Shen family, she still said, and lowered her head to look at her mobile phone. She was so engrossed in the car that she was startled by the sound of knocking on the car window. She lowered the window and saw that the person standing outside was Shen Yuyuan. Song Jintang was surprised for a moment. It turned out that Shen Yuyuan lived here. She was a little embarrassed. After being married for such a long time, this was the first time she knew where her husband lived. No one would believe it if she told others, right? The two of them stared at each other through their half-open car window for a while. Shen Yuyuan's face was quite cold. She spoke first. Shen Nansen is not leaving. Then I will leave first. I really didn't come here on purpose. Come down. Shen Yuyuan said. Song Jintang was a little confused. What? Why go downstairs? Didn't they quarrel enough this afternoon? Come down quickly. Shen Yuyuan was very impatient and went to open her car door. Song Jintang had no choice but to get out of the car. Before she could react, he grabbed her wrist and walked inside. The villa where Shen Yuyuan lived had an exquisite courtyard. When she crossed the courtyard and entered the room, her wrist was pinched red, which showed how hard he pinched. Shen Nansen saw her open her mouth, but in the end said nothing and followed Xu Zong away. They were the only ones left in the living room. Song Jintang still couldn't get rid of his hand. She smiled and said helplessly, Mr. Shen, what's going on? As soon as he finished speaking, Shen Yuyuan stretched out his long arms and pulled her into his arms. Is it okay to hold you like this? The man's hot breath fell on her ears, like a feather tickling her heart. Her eyelashes trembled, and she didn't respond. Shen Yuyuan didn't hear her answer, and bit her earlobe mischievously, saying in a tender voice, Speak. It's okay. She replied. It was quite unexpected. After all, she wasn't expecting it, but suddenly she got it. It was missing a little bit, but the feeling wouldn't lie to her. She quite liked it. Shen Yuyuan said, oh, hugged her tighter, buried his face in the crook of her neck, and rubbed it. Song Jintang sighed, see, people all like warm and reassuring things, not to mention that this is the person you like. Even though you know that her heart is not with her, you still cling to her. How pitiful. Chapter 25, Calling Her Name. The two of them kept hugging each other, and Song Jintang felt that they were hugging less and less each time. As for Shen Yuyuan, why did he hug her so tightly and for such a long time? It wasn't because he suddenly changed his personality, but probably because he had a headache. He was in a high position at the age of 32. Although he looked glamorous in front of outsiders, he was respectfully called Mr. Shen. But it is not easy to protect the family business founded by his grandfather. What's more, the Shen family was badly damaged by his father a few years ago. Shen Yuyuan is the heir carefully cultivated by his grandfather. No matter how small it is to manage emotions and withstand pressure, or as big as the layout of the company, operations are very energy-consuming. Only he knows the sadness behind the scenes. In fact, the first time she saw Shen Yuyuan like this was the night he proposed to Lu Yingxi. She drank a lot, but she was still rational. There was no light on in the room. Shen Yuyuan held her and pushed her against the wall, biting her ear and calling her Xiaoxi. She burst into tears and tried to push him away, but he rubbed her neck stickily and said he had a headache. At that time, it was his soft and gentle voice that made her lose control. From the kiss to the bed, and even the cuddling in the bed afterwards, it was so sweet that it was hard to forget. Under the cover of darkness, they indulged themselves wildly, which was wonderful and memorable. But when the lights were turned on and their eyes met, the man's dark eyes were as cold as a sharp blade, as if they instantly plunged people into an ice cave. She would remember that feeling for the rest of her life. Song Jintang rested her forehead on his shoulder, her long feather eyelashes trembled, hiding the sadness inside, and then she asked calmly, are you okay? Shen Yuyuan let go of her waist and looked at her, I didn't eat. Song Jintang looked at him, didn't respond, and didn't want to cook for him. Center sent me some dumplings that my grandma made, but they weren't cooked. He said in a light tone, but his eyes were always on her. Seeing that she didn't move, Shen Yuyuan thought for a moment and said, it's okay if you don't eat. I'll hold you for a while. Just as he stretched out his hand, Song Jintang turned around and went to the kitchen. Shen Yuyuan raised his eyebrows, glanced at the coat she had just thrown on the sofa, and then his eyes fell on her again. She was wearing a white shirt and black trousers. She must have come directly from the company to play basketball in the afternoon. She looked uncomfortable in his kitchen while wearing high heels. Shen Yuyuan picked up a pair of slippers and called her. Song Jintang looked back and came out to change her shoes. When he returned to the kitchen, the hot water was already boiling. Song Jintang leaned his hands on the table, staring at the rolling water in a daze. Shen Yuyuan put his arms around her waist, hugged her from behind, kissed her neck, and asked, do you want to kiss? Song Jintang said no, just hug her, women are soft-hearted, kissing will give rise to false thoughts. Shen Yuyuan seemed not to hear her. He pinched her chin and kissed her fiercely. Song Jintang felt that he did it on purpose. He picked her up and made her sit on the cooking table. She struggled twice, but he seemed to be more forceful and domineering. She was obedient and let him kiss her. Her shirt buttons were almost all opened. He seemed to be aroused and fumbled with his fingers to open the hidden buttons on her back. Song Jintang took a breath and said, "Is there a condom here? I don't want to take medicine. It's not good for my body if I take too much." The man biting her collarbone paused and said in a hoarse voice, "I'll go buy it." "Forget it," she said, lowering her head and starting to button her clothes. Shen Yuyuan stood up and looked down at her, unhappy. Song Jintang looked up at him. Probably because of the headache, his eyes were red and his lips were a little pale. But the way he looked at her was a little cold. She smiled and said, "You will call her name." Shen Yuyuan moved his lips but said nothing. Song Jintang continued to work. He took the hot dumplings out of the pot before putting on his coat and leaving. Shen Yuyuan didn't say anything else. He sat down to eat. When he heard the door close, his eyes sank. After a while, Song Jintang came back with a very bad look on his face. He put a pile of documents on the cabinet in the entrance hall, and then threw his bag at him. Chapter 026, Tool Man. Shen Yuyuan's shoulder was hit hard, and it was quite painful. He grabbed her wrist, held her in his arms, and asked, "What are you crazy about?" Song Jintang laughed angrily, "I'm crazy." "It's you who's crazy, isn't it you who asked Xuzong to puncture my tire?" "Shen Yuyuan, how could you be so mean?" She was so angry that she tried to step on his foot with her high heels. However, Shen Yuyuan was one step ahead of her and dodged and pushed her onto the dining table. "What does your punctured tire have to do with me? You dare to do it but not take responsibility for it. What kind of place do you live in? Even a fly that flies in would have to register. If it weren't for your sister's facial recognition, would I have been able to come in? I got 2 of my 4 tires punctured in front of your house, and you say it's none of your business." Shen Yuyuan let go of her, snatched her bag, and called Xuzong. Xuzong picked up the phone quickly, asking if his wife had stayed, and told Shen Yuyuan to listen to Dr. Qin and try to be with his wife. Would it relieve his headache? "Xuzong, you've been talking too much lately." After saying that, he hung up the phone. Har har, she knew it was like this. Song Jintang half leaned against the dining table, slightly tilted her head, and looked at him with a smile. Shen Yuyuan sat down and continued to eat without changing his expression. He looked up at her and asked, "Do you want to eat more?" He is really calm and thick-skinned. Song Jintang turned around, leaned on the dining table, and watched him eat slowly with her chin in her hand, while her fingers fell rhythmically on the table, as if knocking on the door of one's heart. "Mr. Shen." She spoke, her voice annoyed. Shen Yuyuan frowned, his eyes still downcast, but he cooperated and said, "Just now, we kissed and hugged each other. Did your headache feel better?" She spoke softly and leaned forward. Shen Yuyuan raised his eyes and saw her nose bridge, which was very close to him. It was slender, straight and beautiful. He put down his chopsticks, his expression unchanged, and replied, "Well, it's much better. It's very useful." Song Jintang saw a hint of provocation in his eyes. This bastard really treated her as a tool. She pondered for a moment, raised her red lips, looked at him, and said nothing. Her eyes were clean and clear without any distracting thoughts, but Shen Yuyuan felt that this woman was deliberately seducing him. His eyes dimmed and he pulled the person into his arms. Song Jintang lay on his shoulder and smiled sweetly. Shen Yuyuan pinched her waist, his voice still quite cold. "What are you laughing at, ho?" She sat on him, leaned close to his ear, and said ambiguously, "Guess what?" An indescribable tingling sensation passed through his heart. Shen Yuyuan didn't like this feeling, but his body seemed to like her teasing very much. Today, Song Jintang was very bold, rubbing against him. As long as the two of them were together, there was no such thing as slow and steady. They were both trying to suppress each other. After a while, her sweater and the shirt inside were hanging on her arms, and her long hair was scattered on her shoulders, like a seductive fairy. Even though her clothes were torn into a mess, she was very obedient. She hugged his neck and coaxed him softly. Men like novelty and excitement in this matter, and she is particularly enthusiastic. Shen Yuyuan's breathing was disordered by her and he squinted his eyes and looked at her. However, things did not develop as he had imagined. The woman's body softened, she hummed twice, gathered her clothes, kissed the corner of his lips and said, I enjoy it, too. Who isn't someone else's tool? Shen Yuyuan's face turned dark. She snorted, then glared back at him, then twisted her waist and went to take a shower. He looked down at his tense body and his messy pants. His face became even darker. This woman really wouldn't take any loss. He could only go to the bathroom upstairs with a gloomy face. Waiting for him to finish his shower, she wandered around the living room wearing his short-sleeved shirt and shorts. The clothes were too big, making her look very delicate. Probably because she heard his movement, she turned around, waved her phone, and said to him gloatingly, Mr. Shen, your 30 million business is gone. Shen Yuyuan took the phone, glanced at it, and then his eyes turned cold. He cursed, you are a useless piece of crap. Chapter 027, Being a Wife Like This. Song Jintang held the document, curled up on the carpet in front of the sofa, and replied indifferently, the business of Lu's hotel has been too easy in recent years. The service is not in place, the hardware is not upgraded, and the reputation is very bad. However, it is still a leader in the market. Isn't it because of your relationship with Lu Yingxi? Shen Yuyuan introduced a lot of businesses to the Lu family, including large and small conferences and luxurious weddings of friends in the circle. These were all very considerable and visible income, but Lu Yingxi's adoptive father still played the cards badly. Shen Yuyuan didn't respond, but sat down on the sofa and said firmly, you did this. The negotiation meeting will start next Wednesday, and this Friday night the old man from the Lu family was messing around in his own resort hotel. Because he is a well-known star, it became a hot topic directly, and there was no time to deal with it. The Deputy Minister of Commerce had always been interested in Song's West City Hotel. He spent 30 million, but it was all wasted. Even if I did it, do you have any evidence? Song Jintang replied to him. Perhaps because the business was in her hands again, she was happy and her tone was soft and tender, which was very pleasing. You have the best motive. He added, took the cigarette box from the table, lit a cigarette, leaned back on the sofa and squinted at her. Her long hair was half dry. She looked at the document in her hand carefully. After signing, she said, TSK, to him, this is my business, okay? You said so much just for the 30 million. You are an investor, and you know best that investment is about investing in people. Lu Yun is so rotten that even his own son stays away from it. You came forward to please your beauty, and you deserve this result. I can't possibly pay you back. I seem to be in need of that little bit of money. He said it in a soft voice with a slightly raised tone, which sounded quite like flirting. Song Jintang glanced at him and curled his lips. He had so much money that he couldn't spend it all in several lifetimes, and he was so smart, didn't he know that Lu Yun would fall from grace sooner or later? He was just using money to coax Lu Yun to be nicer to Lu Yingxi, so that the person he loved could feel the warmth of fatherly love. He is so nice to Lu Yingxi, which makes people envious from the bottom of their hearts. After realizing that they were deeply in love, Song Jintang calmed down. She and Shen Yuyuan couldn't get divorced yet, and it would be boring not to talk about love or romance. It was also good to sleep with him with peace of mind. After all, his face and figure were really good. Thinking of this made her happy. Shen Yuyuan looked at her bent legs stretched out on the grey carpet. Her legs were long and straight, white and beautiful, dazzling. Her toes swayed happily as the corners of her lips turned up. After taking a puff of cigarette, he spoke coldly, Song Jintang, is there anyone like you who is someone else's wife? Song Jintang was stunned for a moment, then laughed out loud. Why did this sound similar to what Shen Nansen said, you don't love my brother? Isn't this what you asked me to do as a wife? Acting affectionate in front of others, but being strangers behind others, have you forgotten? Seeing Shen Yuyuan's ugly face, she laughed even more wantonly, and continued, when I was pestering you, you hated me, even, hated me. Now I have done what you said, but you are not happy again. It is really difficult to be your wife. She was complaining, but her tone was so soft, as if she was acting coquettishly. She is really getting more and more sarcastic. From what you said, it's my fault that we're in this state. He said, taking a long puff of his cigarette, his posture becoming lazy, but it made people feel dangerous. Well, it's time to repeat the same old story again. She was fed up with going over this crap. She spread her hands and admitted, I was wrong, I was really wrong. If I could do it again, I would stay away from you, Mr. Shen. Far away, Song Jintang suddenly got stuck. Seeing the person hurrying in from outside, she raised her red lips and changed the subject. Your sweetheart is here. Shen Yuyuan looked back and saw Lu Yingxi just pushing open the French door and coming in. This scene made her forget to react for a moment, and then her eyes turned red. Song Jintang originally wanted to say hello generously, but the beauty was crying. She lowered her presence and looked at the documents carefully. Miss Lu was crying, so she wouldn't blame her this time, right?